taking a minute out today. I appreciate
No,
it.
I appreciate your willingness to talk to me.
Yeah,
Hope,
absolutely.
yeah, hope I have an interesting story to tell you.
Yeah, I have no doubt you will. So, before we get into your latest album, I want to begin with COVID. 4 years ago or so, we were all trying to figure it out. How are we going to get through it? And it went through the musicians community in a particular way. How did
Hmm.
you get through that time period, and how did it influence the new album or the way that you do things now?
Yeah, it's interesting. In my particular case, COVID coincided also with some other health issues that just kind of came out of nowhere. So, in some ways, my life was going to change anyway. And COVID, uh, outside of gigging and all that, that's obviously a real issue as far
Mhm.
as COVID and those kinds of things. But it it had some positives too in terms of music production because it really, in a lot of ways, coalesced a lot of people getting into remote recording, which is good and bad. It's always nice to get in the studio, everyone together in the studio and do those kinds of things. But with the COVID forced people to really hone their skills, their chops at doing these remote recordings. And that's opened a lot of possibilities that weren't available before. And a lot of the technology also has been helpful. So I know that, you know, I don't want to say that's a preferred way to record music or anything like that, but it really has, it's changed everything in so many ways. My new album is a good representation that I have people, I have people in there from the Ukraine, as a matter of fact. We're recording remotely in a war zone. It's unbelievable, and I really actually feel good about that. I'm able to support these musicians in the Ukraine, and they have the technology and the access to the internet. There have been a couple of days when lights were out, Kiev, and people couldn't do things, but I mean, those things were pretty much unthinkable just even 4 or 5 years ago, or at least it was a lot more difficult. And now the software is really advanced. So I guess I'm just trying to shed a little different light on COVID. It's easy to talk about COVID as, and it certainly was not a positive or a good thing in any way, but that for me, the ability to work with people from all over the world so easily now and so seamlessly, and even live. I also do some classical music, and I had the Czech National Symphony. I had the opportunity to have them record a piece of mine, and that was done remotely. I couldn't get to Prague, and it was just amazing to be able to, in live, work with an entire orchestra, have a conductor talk to me in real time, rehearsing and then recording the music, and it came out really nice. And that just wasn't possible. There's a piece of software called Audio Movers, which has really revolutionized all those kind of things, where it's nearly without any kind of delays, and the fidelity is good. Not the long-winded answer to your question. I
No,
hope
it's
I covered
good.
that.
And,
Yeah.
and I think that's the great thing that is part of this modern living that we're in. I mean, it even goes back decades and decades that artists get the chance to collaborate on projects that bring light to things like the war in Ukraine and different things that we've had to go through. Did you feel what are you ultimately hoping the listener gets from this project at the end of the day?
Well, that's a good question. I think it goes back to what is music and what is art, and in a general kind of sense. I think I think of myself. I used to be a pianist. I started out. We can talk about my history a little more. I was a hardcore post bop jazz pianist. My first gig was with Joe Henderson and people like that. And with time, I become more. I consider myself more of a composer. And so as a composer, I, it's an interesting kind of role because you compose music and then you hand it over to the musicians, and it gets manifested from black and white on the paper. And obviously, as an arranger too, you have influence over all that, and then eventually becomes music. And I've been struggling with sometimes with it's easy in the jazz world, especially, to sometimes, and it's a criticism of jazz sometimes, that jazz is a musician's music. And so I've been struggling with that. And this new album that I just put out, I think, deals with that. And then I want to make music that's challenging and interesting, but also listenable to. That's evocative, emotional, fun, that's listener oriented, but also, there's a certain I think every jazz musician wants to is always thinking about their colleagues a little bit. They want them to think, "Oh, that's cool, that's really interesting." So I'm trying to really balance hard the not the intellectual side, but the musician side of it, the professionals kind of thinking about the music with making music that's really just purely listenable by a larger audience. So I'm thinking about my audience more. I think I'm matured in that way. Instead of just thinking about other musicians, sometimes I got to admit that, as many jazz musicians do, we think about our colleagues a little too much, and we don't think about the listener enough. And so this new album, I think, is a like if I may say so myself, is it. I really had the listener in mind, and decisions I made, like with my co-producer Mauricio Zotorelli, who's a absolutely amazing musician and drummer. Is one of the he's currently in Brazil. He lived in New York many years, but he tours with Ivan Lins and Paquete de Rivera, Eliana Elias. He's super in demand, but he's also got a great ear for helping me to make my music more accessible to listeners. And I really appreciated his work with that, and I feel that I've matured in that regard, and as opposed to just making music for musicians. And I'm exaggerating that point, obviously, but uh, that makes sense at all?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I'm not sure. It's a little bit of it's a complex issue because I know that, for example, Coltrane was criticized sometimes during his lifetime for, oh, your music is just for musicians, or it's just, it wasn't. It was so emotional that uh, and but people he get criticism from people saying, "What, you should practice in your hotel room, not on the stage." And
Yeah.
so jazz has suffered a lot with that kind of uh, being accused of being too intellectual sometimes, and, and I understand that to some extent. Is that classical music also has that kind of stigma attached to it. So
Yeah.
I'm keeping that in mind to try and make music that can is both interesting and pretty
Yeah.
and fun to listen to.
So let's go back to your roots. Are you from San Francisco?
I am. I grew up in the Bay Area in Palo Alto near Stanford,
Okay.
and which was a fortunate kind of occurrence because my high school had a very strong emphasis on arts and music. My high school music teacher, a guy named Jim Robinson, a trombone player from Eastman, he was really instrumental in my case. I They had skipped me grades and whatnot. I was much younger than my colleagues, and I was a little bit sort of isolated from my colleagues in high school. And music was a way for me to, and Jim was really instrumental in kind of uh, having me get involved in music and doing that as a way of being more social and whatnot. And he was amazing. He brought in, that's how I got to know Joe Henderson. He brought in Woody Shaw, and I started working with some of these folks, and he got me on a TV show to do a show with Dizzy Gillespie when I was 15 or 16. That was an incredible experience, and so I was very lucky to be in that environment I'm really sad these days as I see schools now cutting music and arts and whatnot, because I see from my own personal life how important it is for kids to be involved in those kinds of things, and how that really reinforces uh, all the whole entire learning process that leads to math and science, and all those things are benefit from students who are doing music. So yeah, I started out there, and that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a musician. I started working some with Joe Henderson, like I mentioned, doing a lot of his more of his local gigs, and we did master classes, things like that. He'd take me along, and I spent a lot of time at his house, and he was kindest man. Just absolutely kind man. I was, of course, at that age, in awe of him. He was to me I was 15 or 16 or well, a few years, 16, 17, and here was this grand master of jazz, and I'm hanging out in his house with him, and uh, it was just you can learn more about how to play music than playing scales sometimes, or studying theory, just by being inspired. And there was a club in San Francisco at the time called the Keystone Corner, which I'm sure you know, Todd Barkin's club.
Yeah.
and he'd take me down there whenever there was somebody. For example, McCoy Tyner was my hero. They used to call me Little McCoy, and McCoy was there. He took me down to meet him, and it's just that kind of mentor, that just it's priceless. You can't. It's even hard to describe. Um, so that was my very beginnings, and I started playing more and more, and I went on a tour, not with Joe, with somebody else who's a Blue Note artist. I don't want to mention his name just because it was kind of a tragic situation, but on the tour, some really bad things happened, some violent things happened, and here I was, this young kid from, I was middle class kid, and this all of a sudden thrown in this world of jazz, which was not always pretty. That's what I learned that lesson real quick. It's uh, there's a dark side to jazz and music in general. I think good things don't happen at 2 o'clock in the morning in a lot of places, and that's just the nature of jazz, and because it happens late at night. Some bad stuff happened, and it really affected me, and I just thought about, is this the way I want to make my living? And I really came to question that, and I had this really wild experience where Joe Henderson called me up and he said, "Okay, man, pack your bags." I said, "What?" He said, "Yeah, we're leaving. We're going to spend the summer in Europe recording 3 albums, and you're gonna go with me." And at that moment, something weird just came over me, and I remember saying, "I can't do it, Joe. I'm not going to go." I turned them down, and I remember the last thing he said, "Well, who should I call?" And I said, "I don't know, Cedar Walton." It's like he called Cedar Walton. I eventually went, but it was a it was an interesting experience. It was almost surreal for me to turn down. That's the call that you wait. That's it. That would have been the thing. But I decided at that moment, I'm just not sure that I I can live in that world. I want to do that world. And touring with Joe obviously would have been a different thing than what I had gone through and that other experience. But nonetheless, I was seeing, I had a chance to see so many talented musicians at that point. So many talented musicians just have such a hard time. Even, Joe Henderson, he played weddings and bar mitzvahs, and it wasn't like he was rolling the dough. And he was probably one of the most famous people. And he and Wayne Shorter were probably the two top people in his lifetime. And he was literally playing weddings and things like that. And I just I just I don't know. I just realized that, or I thought that maybe this wasn't the right lifestyle for me. And again, I'm going on a little bit here. So I ended up going to music school, and I also, in California, had started working with people who are making wine. I was in a wine area in California, and I got really interested in that. So it was just when wine in California was taking off, and we got involved in a small cooperative. We leased some vineyards, and it turns out in winemaking, there's some decisions that you make based on chemistry, and none of us had any experience at all in chemistry. I was the youngest of this group, way younger. They said, "Hey, John, guess what? You're going to go take some chemistry classes and figure out how to do these tests we need to do." So one thing led to another. I ended up quitting music school and getting my degree. I went to the University of California in Santa Cruz and ended up doing a chemistry major, of all things, which I never in a million years would have imagined. And that's why I say these experiences in high school where I had an experience where I left open to the idea of learning that, and I think that music experience, having those positive experiences was really good. And one thing led to another. I ended up getting my doctorate degree in chemistry. Now, this whole time I was doing music, I was recording, and had recorded albums in California with a Brazilian singer, and had Harvey. Well, now he's Harvey S. It was Harvey Swartz at the time, and Ayrto from Brazil recorded on it. And so I was still doing all those things, but uh, I felt the need to have this sort of you know other this two lane approach to my life. I still wasn't sure. And please stop me if I'm going on here,
Oh,
but
no, you're good.
uh, I went to Cornell for grad school, and while I was at Cornell, I ended up by mistake having sort of my 15 minutes of fame in science, where I was the first person to melt a diamond. and that was interesting. It was a mistake, and but it kind of, it was fun. Got to be in all the newspapers, and I got to prove, because physicists had thought the diamond couldn't be melted, and I successfully melted the diamond. And the fact that it was a mistake was also kind of interesting. And finished my doctorate, and had to make a decision about whether I wanted to get a real job or not, or stay in music. I was, again, always doing music during this time, and I decided, I did a couple of just 1 year gigs teaching, just to survive, and I was really interested. I got really interested in Brazilian music. I had been. I could say I recorded with Airto and things like that. But Brazilian music was always sort of appealing to me, and so many other people too. It's obviously very infectious music. And I decided, what the hell? I packed my bags and I went to Rio de Janeiro, and I ended up getting a job. I got a grant through a Brazilian federal agency to be a visiting professor at the Catholic University in Rio de Janeiro, which was just amazing. So within a really short period of time, I had to become fluent in Portuguese to be able to teach chemistry in Portuguese, which was amazing. But the experience, I mean, I could go on for hours about, just hanging out. I got to meet Tom Jobim, Antônio Carlos Jobim, Hermeto Pascoal, all these heroes of Brazilian music. I spent many, many hours and days at Hermeto Pascoal's house. His house, I'm not sure you're familiar with his music much, but
Yeah.
he's just the grand wizard of music, and his house was always open to anybody. Um, in fact, he even had an album which in English translates to "Everybody plays except unless you don't want to." And so you could go to his rehearsals, and it was kind of cool because he lived out in the suburbs of Rio, which was it was quite a trip to go out there. Several bus rides from the sort of the part of Rio that people think about, out to where he lived. But he had bought like a compound, and all of his band, they had houses circling his house, and every day basically there was a rehearsal, and they weren't on tour. And the only, the price of admission was a bottle of cachaça, if you could, which is a Brazilian rum. And everyone just had a great time until late at night. And I mean, those experiences, and like I say, getting I got to know Tom Jobim a little bit, and any number of people. And I ended up working with Hermeto's saxophone player, a guy named Carlos Malta, and we worked a lot. I got to uh, play all the major clubs in Rio and around Brazil, with him and some other people. An opening sometimes for great acts like Baden Powell and things like that. And so that experience was just like a fairy tale almost. Rio de Janeiro is a great place for a young person to be, especially if you got a couple of dollars in your pocket.
Sure.
And I wouldn't trade that in the world. I ended up getting married to a woman from Brazil there, and we decided that Rio's great, but it's not a great place to raise a family. It's a great place, like I say, to have fun, but it's it's a big city, and it's got its problems. So uh, getting married, and I adopted her young child, 2-year-old child. I decided I had to be a little more serious, and I ended up getting a teaching gig here in the States, at a small university here in Pennsylvania. And here I am. I have completed the circle here.
You have absolutely completed the circle. So at the end of the day, why do you love jazz?
Why do I love jazz? Well, jazz is an interesting word, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to get into a big polemic discussion here, but
Sure.
I know guys like Charles Mingus would hated the word jazz.
And Nicholas
And,
Payton. Yeah.
yeah, and he called it jazz, but he used S's instead of Z's.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I don't want to get into all that so much, but jazz is a big word, and I even sometimes hesitate to call myself a jazz musician or jazz composer. And I struggle with that a lot too, even because I do a lot of this Brazilian music, and I feel even a little self-conscious at times about saying my music is, Brazilian influenced or whatnot. There's a lot of, I feel I paid my dues. I was in Brazil many, many years, and I know the music well now, and I speak the language fluently, and know the culture. But nonetheless, I'm very self-conscious about these kinds of labels and words. So I'd like to think of myself as a musician, and who's definitely been influenced by jazz. I mean, it, like I say, when I was younger, I was little McCoy. There was no question about it. I imitated McCoy time when I was 15 years old, and I went from there. But it's still there inside of me, and so I definitely feel like I'm a melting pot. We all bring this baggage and background to us. I happen to fit into what my music would fall into what people would probably call jazz, but I really hesitate to call it that. Again, I'm not sure if I'm making sense.
No, you
Uh,
are. No, I
I,
get it.
it's something I struggle with, and I think a lot of people do.
Sure.
Uh, I worry about that word jazz. I worry about the music because, um, you know, it, a lot of the original artists and whatnot have, in some ways, have been. I'm worried they're being forgotten. I worry about people forgetting about people like Coltrane or other people like that, and jazz. We now have smooth jazz and all these things, and people want to. I talk sometimes to PR people or promoters, and they say, what? Why don't you do something more like smooth jazz and all these kinds of things? And I'm thinking that to me isn't really jazz. So um, does that answer your question again?
Yeah, no, no, no. No, it totally does. And
Yeah.
we've really ran away with this half hour here. So I just want to
Oh,
make sure that anybody that wants to pick up the new album, work the best place to get it, catch anything live, anything else going on in your world, where can they go?
yeah. Currently, the new album's called Guanabara Eyes, and it's available. Just got released on Spotify and everywhere else the music is streamed. You can hear it for free on YouTube. I guess there's probably ads, but it's on any of the streaming services, and I really recommend that people take a look at that. They can look at my Facebook. I think my official Facebook address is jgold.gold. But if they search John Gold, it should come up, and there should be links to. I always offer people free links to my music if they don't have Spotify and things like that. There's a new CD coming out in a couple of months that I'm finishing again with Mauricio, and then I'm doing a kind of a post bop CD that I'm working on now. That's a tribute album to a lot of my heroes. I just did a tribute to Gary Bartz, and happily I just got an email from him. Got him somehow. He was blown away by it. Sent me the sweetest email. The guy's the nicest guy in the world. So tribute to Gary Bartz, trumpeter Charles Tolliver. It's going to be a series of post-bop tributes.
Wonderful. John, it's great to meet you. Thank you, sir. Thank you for taking a minute out today and talking about the music in your life. It's been fascinating.
Thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. Nice to meet you too, Hope. And let me know if I can be of any help.
Absolutely.